Yeah. So the whole point of case assignment is that you want to assign case to every noun phrase in the sentence. If you're unable to assign case to a noun phrase, that means it's an ungrammatical sentence. What things can assign case? Verbs, tenses, and prepositions. That's basically it. And in the sentences that we're going to go over, there's no prepositions, but I'll go over what to do with a preposition if you want to, but we'll see what that goes. The most important thing is that you know what governing means. Brian has this interesting definition here: if and only if the first branching node that dominates B also dominates A. For me, that's just like really hard to parse. It just doesn't make sense. So the way I'm gonna describe it to you is nice colloquial fashion. Just take a look, take this tree, for example. If you're sisters on the tree, if you're next to each other and you have the same mom, you can dominate each other. So this noun phrase can dominate this verb phrase, this noun phrase can govern the verb phrase can govern the noun phrase, tense can govern the noun phrase, so on and so forth. They're all on the same sister level. Another way that you can govern is if you're the uncle or aunt, whatever gender you so choose. This verb can govern any of these three. It's the uncle, right? It's like doing great, happy. You cannot govern if you're the niece. So this verb here cannot govern any of these guys up here. Does this make sense so far? So that's the rule we're going to use. Are you sisters or older? That's the best way I can describe it. Here's an example of something that doesn't govern each other. If you're cousins. So as you see here, this noun cannot govern this verb. Even though it looks like they're on the same level, they're not sisters. They're actually cousins because their mom isn't exactly the same. Like this person has this mom, this person has this mom. They're not the same mom. So that doesn't work either. Yeah, and that's the basic rules. The key things to know, I have like a little cheat sheet somewhere that has gotten lost as I wrote this thing 1,000 times, but the key thing is here on this slide. If I can scroll, I apologize. Let me scroll. Okay. Is that noun phrases must be case marked. So that's something we kind of mentioned earlier. What does each of these things do? What does the verb do to the noun phrase? What does the tense do to the verb phrase? And what does a preposition do to the verb phrase? If I was to write up a quick sheet, if a verb is doing the case assigning, that means it's assigning accusative, which means that it assigns it as an object of the sentence. And that means you use a him or her pronoun, technically. If it's a tense is the opposite. Tense assigns nominative case, which means that it's the subject of the sentence, which means you use she, he pronouns. That's like the most simplistic way to describe it. I think prepositions also are the same here, so you can do verb/prepositions, do this. And then there's two exceptions, I guess, is the infinitive case right here. So an infinitive verb is special case. So we're going to mark it with like, I don't know, double stars. Infinitive verbs. I'm pretty sure you know what an infinitive verb, but it's to something, to eat, to sleep. So that infinitive verbs are special because they assign accusative case, but they don't get any tenses. You'll see what I mean about that later, and we'll get there. And then finally, passive verb phrase. If you're a passive verb phrase equals nothing at all. It's useless. You can't do anything with it. So that's the kind of the cheat sheet I would either like write down in your notes or like keep with you just because it's like easy. I don't want to have to think about him, her, accusative, object, nominative, subject. That's too much. So that's all I did. Okay, let's dive into a quick example. The syntax trees. And so we're going to go over it with the tree on the slide, but I'm also going to tell you how to do it without the tree if it's not available, because who knows what he might throw at you. But the actual questions that he's going to be asking you is, what are all the possible case assigners? What are all the possible case assignees, the things that need case to be assigned to them? and what is assigning case to what. So those are the three things. Hopefully that makes sense so far. Here we go. So given this sentence, if he gives you a tree, it's probably going to be disassembled this way. But let's just like reconstruct what the actual English sentence is, because Jack passed believe Jill passed be a Yale student makes 0 sense to me as a person. So let's just put it back into English. Jack, I clearly have written this sentence before. Jack believed Jill Jill was a Yale student. The past tense of be is was. There you go. So Jack believed Jill was a Yale student. What are all the noun phrases in this sentence? Go for it.
Jack, Jill, Yale student.
Perfect. Yeah. Technically a Yale student, because it all falls into it. If you see the or some, those are all a part of the noun phrase. So what we're going to do now is we're going to separate out all the tenses. So let's look for all of the things that can assign case. So that's tenses, verbs, and prepositions. Can you just list them all just for the sake of clarity?
So past tense of believe and to be.
Yes, great. So we got 2 tenses. What about the verbs?
Be, believe.
Yeah, great, wonderful. So we have a bunch. Keep those in mind, because that's what you'd probably need to write on your exam. What are all the possible case assignees and what are all the case assigners? And then now let's try to assign things to each other. The general idea is that you probably want to have something assigning case that's pretty close to the case assignee. Like, why go across the family tree if you can stay pretty close by? So let's just deal with each of the noun phrases. First is this Jack noun phrase. What's the closest thing that can assign case to Jack?
The tense.
Yeah, great. And if you look at your cheat sheet, what case gets assigned when a tense is doing the assigning?
It's nominative.
Great. Yeah, so nominative makes it a subject of the sentence, makes it a he, she. This is how you can kind of check whether or not you did the right case assigner, because let's try replacing Jack with those pronouns, right? So let's do this. This is our sentence. Jack believed Jill was a Yale student. Does it make sense if it's he believed Jill was a Yale student? Yeah, it makes sense. So I think that means we did some good case assigning there. Let's just group those two together and kind of throw them out of our brains for a second as we continue to do the rest of the noun phrases. Next noun phrase is Jill. What's the closest assigner in the area?
The closest one, I think, is the tense next to it.
Perfect. Yeah.
It could also be assigned by the verb phrase that governs it, which is also believed.
Yes, that's wonderful. So you probably want to correct it and say it's governed by the verb, not the verb.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got it right. Like, it could be believed is a totally fine case assigner, and so is past. Both of them are totally fine. But the one that is closest is past, like you mentioned. So that's great. So this assigns it. Since it's the exact same thing as before, tense assigns what case? It assigns subject case / nominative case, whatever you want to call it. So we would use she, not her. Final noun phrase, a Yale student. What is the closest thing that can assign it?
The verb to be.
Yes, wonderful. Make sure to not say to be if it's not a to be. It's just be in this case. Unless the sentence is to be, then use to be. Okay, great. So that's that one. Yeah, perfect. That's a very straightforward sentence. It's kind of easy because you just got tenses to assign all the time. And then on this very last one, you're like, the only thing that's close by is this verb. It governs, you're good. Let's get a little more complicated. We're going to speed through these as we proceed onwards. So you have this sentence now. Jack believed Jill to be a Yale student. So now there's a to be. And what is to be? To be is a special case. And why is that? Can you recall what it is?
because it cannot assign case.
Close, but not quite. It doesn't have a tense. Infinitive verbs don't have tense. They can assign case still as a verb, but remember how before
Okay.
you have believed here that has a tense separated out? To takes the spot of the tense. Even though to be is technically present tense, the to is occupying the spot. There's no spot for present tense to hop in anymore. So you just have to be. That's what's happening. So just like before, we have Jack, Jill, and Yale student as the things that need case to be assigned to them because they're the noun phrase. And so let's just go through it. Just if you're able to figure out what needs to be assigned to what, just list them all.
Okay, so Jack is going to be assigned case by past tense.
Perfect.
Then Jill is going to be assigned case by believed.
Perfect.
Because it be to be. And then Yale student is going to be assigned case by be.
Perfect.
Just be.
Wonderful. I'm so glad. Good job. All right. Easy. Easy. Next one. All right, go for it. Just say what assigns case to what.
Okay, so it needs an assignment and it's assigned by the past tense.
Mhm.
Then Jill is going to be assigned case by also the past tense, but the one right next to it.
Mhm.
And Yale student, I think, I think it should be be again.
Yeah, good. Okay, so here's the trick question now. Like, what's going on with was thought?
Well, it goes with the first past tense case assigner.
Yes. So yes, so what I'm trying to get at is was thought is a special kind of verb. What kind of verb is it?
Passive.
Passive. So what happens when there's a passive?
I don't know what answer you're looking for.
Just,
but
it's kind of on the screen. It's just useless. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. Whenever you see a passive verb, it doesn't even count as a possible case assigner. This is the only reason why this matters is just because when you write down all the possible case assigners, don't list this passive verb because it cannot assign case.
Okay.
That's all. But you got your perfect assignment otherwise. So I just wanted to add and make sure you know when you see a passive verb, just ignore it. Throw it out the window. Okay, good. And then the last one, this is like the final boss. Just like before we have this passive, and just like before we have this infinitive of the to be. You can mark those out if you want to. I personally like to just so I can see it, but that's up to you guys. All right, go for it.
So it is governed by the past tense.
Yes.
Then was thought cannot assign case.
Yep.
Jill is interesting.
This is great. What's going through your head?
What is going through my head is that it cannot be, it doesn't have anything that can govern it other than the first past tense.
Right.
Which is way higher up the tree.
Yes, but also that first tense is already being used up. Once it's being used up, you can't really double dip. So that means that there's nothing that's assigning case to Jill. I think you realize this, there's nothing that you can really do. This verb down here is not a sister node, it's like a niece, so we can't use it. And that means that the sentence is ungrammatical. Wow, we've come to a conclusion. Okay.
Yay.
Yeah, so that's how you do it with the trees. As you can tell, like with the trees, it's like much easier because you can just see like what works and what doesn't work. What happens if there's no tree? So here's let's just like take one of the previous ones and then just try to do it without a tree. And I can show you how I would do it. It was thought Jill was a Yale student. That would be the sentence that you're given. So then the first thing you have to do is pick out what are the actual noun phrases, what are the verbs, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. So let's separate out all the tenses that we can. What past tense, right?
Mhm.
And then was is also past tense. None of these are infinitives. You got to check for that before you separate out tenses. But since none of them are infinitives, we're all good. One thing to note is obviously was thought is a passive. So we probably want to label that so that you don't think about it. Ideally, if you had this on pen and paper, I would just cross it out so that you don't get confused, but that's fine. Now, the trick here is to think about the fact that on this tree, I don't know if you've noticed this, but tense is never on the same level as the verb. It is like always the aunt to the verb because it is sisters to the verb phrase, which is different than being sisters to the verb. And what this does then is that you can always imagine it in your head that tense is a tier above the verb, and the verb is now in a position that can only dominate all the stuff after it, but not the stuff before it. So that's kind of what you should be figuring out mentally. And so as a result here, we can see that, all right, when we deal with this tense here, past cannot, when we deal with this word was or be, however you want to separate it out, was cannot govern any of the junk before it. It can only govern the stuff after it. And that makes life a lot easier because now you're like, all right, well, if it can only govern the stuff after it, let's just put them together, like if they group together up. And then we kind of seen really easily that if it starts with the noun phrase, it, and then the next thing is a tense, you can generally group those together because they're sisters, they're the closest thing. Why wouldn't you want to group them together? And now you're just left with the middle noun phrase, Jill. And you're like, all right, what can govern this? This is a passive. So essentially you should just erase that from your brain and all you're left is Jill and past. So that's the way to do it without the tree. Hopefully that makes sense.
Or you could just draw the tree. It makes sense.
Yeah, you could draw the tree but I'm just worried that it's just, for me personally, I'm so scared I'll make a mistake, especially in terms of like the sentence and then breaking it up again and then the verb phrase. Like there's just a lot more like tiny levels that don't matter in the grand scheme of things. So for me, it's easier just to be like, all right, the most relevant thing is tense on the same level as the noun phrase, is the verb in a governing position, and that's all I need to care about.